Okay, good morning everyone. Nice to see you here. Welcome to Wednesday of week 10, I think. Um, yeah, if you're in Vancouver, you'll see it's a beautiful sunny day out there. So I'm going to try and get outside after this class and get some get some vitamin D synthesized from the sun anyway. Um, okay, so Cindy's here. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, KC again. Good morning, Lily. Hello, Karen again. Hello, Aliana. Hello, Mashid. Hello, Jimmy. Good morning. Not good morning. Good evening, Thika. Good evening, Ella. Morning, Manish. Good morning, Luan. Good morning. Oh, good morning, Tammy. You're here. Hello. Um, that's cool. Pearly's here. Good morning, Pearly. So we'll just wait for a few more people to trickle in. I just wanted to do a bit of housekeeping before we start. And so what I wanted to say to you is number one, I think we should have our fourth quiz on Monday. So we'll do that. We'll have our fourth quiz on Monday. I'll post in Microsoft Teams the sort of class range that the quiz will be on. I think it'll probably be on China though. So we'll do a quiz on China on Monday. The second thing I want to bring up with you here is that we've only got about 3 weeks left. So we've got Thursday and Friday of this week, and then we've only got 3 weeks. And so after that, or in that 3 week period, we would have to do another micropaper, and then the final research paper, which is a bigger one, and then and still another quiz. And I think that's too much for 3 weeks. And so what I'm going to suggest is that we not do the third micropaper. So we just forget about that, and we'll have one more quiz toward the end and on Monday. And we'll just focus on the research paper, which I will assign to you on Tuesday. So I wanted to take a quick vote or get some approval from you. So what do you think? Should we just get rid of the third micropaper, just not do it, and move on to the final one? Chirag Bharat, I'm not sure who you are, but hello. But what do you think? Should we get rid of this thing and just not do it? Because I don't think we have enough time. I do not think we have enough time. So Karen's gonna say yes. Pearly, I'm gonna say that's yes. Jimmy says that's cool. Cindy's okay. Mashid's okay. Ella's okay. Casey says yes. I know, but it's still nice to ask, right? We could get rid of it, but where do the marks go? They'll just be either, I think what I would do is just leave it as an average of the 2 micropapers that we've done already. So yeah, so I would keep whatever that weight for micropapers is, I would keep it. It would just be made up of 2 rather than 3. Quizzes. Oh, that's Manish. Okay. Really? Didn't I see? Manish, don't you have enough? Do you have 2? Oh. All right. Got it. Okay. Cindy, how many quizzes do we still have? We'll have 1 on Monday, and then we'll have 1 more after that. And so I don't know when, maybe sometime in the last week we'll do that, okay? So 2 more, 1 on Monday, 1 later. Carmen says hi. Hello, Carmen. So yeah, I'm hearing pretty clear support for getting rid of this, so I think we will officially get rid of it. So we won't do it. There's still a second paper which I think is due next Tuesday. which means I'm really going to have to mark it quick and get it back to you so that we can, so you can start working on the final research paper. So I guess I'm committing to, marking that really quickly. Okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll have a quiz. We'll have a quiz on Monday. We'll have no micropaper, no third micropaper, but the second one is still due. I know you're working on that, and I think it's due on Tuesday. Still hand that one in. I will mark it really, really quickly so I can get it back to you, and you can work on the final research paper, which I think I would like to have due on I think I'd like to have it due on the last day of class. I think that's what I would like. So yeah, good morning, Carmen. Good morning, Adalbert. Okay, quiz on Monday. No micropaper 3. Micropaper 2 is still due on Tuesday. Bigger research paper coming up. I will assign it to you on Tuesday so that you'll have almost 3 weeks to work on it. Okay, good. Okay, let's do this. So yesterday and the day before, we were looking at ancient Greece, right? And we talked a little bit about these Bronze Age Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations. We said that they kind of disappeared. They disappeared during this Dark Age period where people abandoned centralized settlements, centralized cities. They kind of went off into the countryside and, lived there. They've lost their writing style. And then Greek culture starts to kind of reform and come together in the Archaic period. And so we have the appearance of, so this is our Archaic period here where we have city-states starting to appear, Greek colonization, writing, kind of a pan-Hellenic identity. So an idea that all these Greek city-states are kind of united in kind of a uniform Greek culture or a sense of belonging to Greek culture. Good morning, Michael, and good morning, Sabrina. We have the first Olympic Games during this Archaic period, and we have these sort of traditional stories, the Iliad and the Odyssey, that were probably passed down orally for quite some time before Archaic Greece, but this is where they are written down for the first time. And then, of course, because they're written down, we're able to read them and understand them. And both of these works are quite long, they're quite extensive, and so we learn a lot about Greek mythology, Greek religion, and sort of Greek values and beliefs, right? What kind of things they think are important. Yeah, so again, we have all of these city-states scattered throughout Greece and around Asia Minor, which is what Turkey is called at the time. These little poli, or polises, these little poli are little independent city-states that the Greeks create. And so each polis is an urban center. It's a city, usually has walls around it. They are not super large, so there's a few thousand people living in each one. There's about 1,500 of these scattered around the Aegean. And like we mentioned, each of these polis is different. Okay, so they all have their own kind of culture, they all have their own kind of economy, they all have their own form of political organization, their own sort of special gods or gods that favor their polis. So they're all a little bit different, right? Living in one polis is not the same as living in another. And so people have an idea of belonging to a greater culture of the Greeks, but people really identify not so much with, Greece, but with their own city-state, with their own polis. And so people didn't identify themselves so much as Greeks, but as Thebans or Athenians or Spartans or Corinthians, right? Right, so we said these three polises, these polis, had numerous different systems of government. And so the three most common ones we see are monarchies, and then we see oligarchies, and then we see democracies. And again, some government systems have a little bit of a mix of a few of these. Okay, so monarchies is where we have an individual ruler who has full authority, and we've seen lots of examples of that so far, where with Chinese emperors and Egyptian pharaohs. There are oligarchies where a small group of people are the ones who are in power. Sometimes these are nobility, sometimes they're wealthy people, sometimes they're the most educated people, but oligarchies are governments that are led by small groups. And then, of course, there's democracy, where people have the power, people make the decisions. And Athens, of course, is the textbook example of that in the Greek world. So yesterday I asked you to read this section here, and you told me that hoplites are these things, right? Are soldiers, are citizens of a city-state that if they need to go to war, they arm themselves. And so they have shields, they have a short little sword, they have a long spear, and a helmet of some type. And they go to battle in this type of formation called a phalanx. And so everybody kind of lines up together and uses their shield to cover themselves and in part the person beside them. And then they kind of lunge at each other or lunge at the opposing army. And so in a picture like this, you can pretty clearly see how difficult it would be to attack a hoplite phalanx, right? They're like a giant porcupine with, quills everywhere. And so it was very difficult to sort of get past them and to overpower them on the battlefield. But if you did, you would kind of charge at them. You would try to break up this formation. And then once you did, then you could pull out your sword and start hacking people up, right? That was how battles were fought at the time. So the phalanx is not about the skill of individual fighters, okay? So it's not about who's best with a sword. It's about which army, which group of hoplites can work together the best, right? Which ones can cooperate. And so cooperating and working together is what allows you to win the battle, okay? And so in that way, we said that the polis and the phalanx have kind of a similar ideology, right? Because both the polis and the phalanx require a bunch of citizens to work together and cooperate, and everybody has to do their part in order to be successful, right? And so both of these things are similar in that way. They're not about the talents of one particular person. They are about everybody cooperating in order to succeed. And again, if everyone cooperates to the best of their ability, then both the polis and the phalanx will be successful, right? So it's all about cooperation between people. It's not about one person with superior talent or superior skills. Yesterday we talked a little bit about the major Greek gods in the period, and so we met Zeus, we met Hera, we met Poseidon, we met Hermes, the messenger god, and we should probably include, I don't know why I don't have him in there, but we should probably include Hades in there as well, right? Because Hades is the god of the underworld and he's important. I don't know why he's not listed there. Aphrodite should probably be listed there too. She's the goddess of love. But we also have Athena and Ares, and Dionysus, and Apollo and Artemis. And again, this kind of shows us that we have a polytheistic religion here with a bunch of different gods that the Greeks would worship or sacrifice to at different times, depending on what they wanted, right? We said that there were different cults, right? Different groups of people who were responsible for honoring particular gods, right? And we also said that there were oracles. And so these were kind of like prophets or priests or people who were thought to be able to speak to the gods. And you would go to the oracle and you would ask them a question, right? And so this would almost be like asking the gods themselves for their opinion on something, and the oracle would tell you what the gods said, right? Or be able to sort of foretell the future. Okay. We also talked a little bit about myths and what myths were yesterday, because we encountered a few of them when we answered this set of questions. And I won't go through all of them, but the important things I think to come out of this were the ideas that the gods in ancient Greece they may be all powerful, but they are not all virtuous. They are not perfect beings. They were very much human in the way that they interacted with each other and the way they interacted with people. Sometimes they acted in an honorable, benevolent way. Sometimes they acted in a hello, Min. Sometimes they acted in a sort of a childish way. Sometimes they were jealous. Sometimes they were punitive. And so the Greek gods are not sort of role models in any way. They're very much human in the way they behave with each other. But the Greek religion and the myths that support it, we said, help the Greeks to understand things about the natural world. They help them to understand how things came to be the way that they are. And of course, all myths do that for all people around the world. But they also show us how sophisticated the Greeks were, right? So this Euthyphro dilemma that Socrates was thinking about the nature of goodness. How do we know something is good? Is something good because the gods say that we should do it? Or do the gods say that we should do something simply because it's good? And if that is the case, then how do we measure whether something is good or not? What makes an action good or bad? And so he was doing some very early philosophical thought, moral philosophical thought here in Greece. And we'll come back to Socrates a little bit later, but it's very similar to what Confucius was doing, right? He was trying to find out how to make a good society, and he wasn't looking to religion or to the heavens in order to figure that out. He was using logic and philosophy to try and figure that out. And finally, and this is important too, there was this concept of hubris, right? And so the idea that you should know your place. You know, don't be too prideful, don't be too full of yourself, don't think you're so great, and definitely don't think you are greater than the gods, because the gods don't like that. They get offended and they usually horribly punish anyone who thinks that they are better than the gods. And there's lots of myths in which this takes place. People think they are more talented or more beautiful than the gods, and the gods hear about that, and then horrible things happen to these people. Okay, so that brings us to Athens and Sparta. Okay, and so we're going to dig into the history of Athens in the classical period. And we're going to look at Athens specifically, even though there's lots of Greek city-states. We're going to look at them for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're going to play a pretty large role in what happens to Greece in the classical period. And so the Athenians are going to help to defeat a Persian invasion with the help of the Spartans, but the Athenians are going to help defeat a Persian invasion. They're going to defeat a second Persian invasion later on. They're going to build sort of an empire in the Aegean. And then, spoiler alert, it's all going to come crashing down for them. But Athens is a city-state that plays a prominent role in this phase of history in sort of the Mediterranean and the Aegean world. The second reason we're going to look at them is that, of course, their ideas, their literature, their plays, their philosophy, their political system all have a major impact on Rome, and then later a major impact on the Western world. And so this tiny little city-state in the classical period, which is only about 150 years, winds up having a pretty significant historical effect later on. And so we'll dig a little deeper into Athens for those two reasons. We'll also talk a little bit about Sparta. You read about Sparta just a few minutes ago. I might come back to them tomorrow. Might come back to the Spartans tomorrow and just dig into them a little deeper. But the Spartans will play a major role in Greek history as well. They are similar to the Athenians in some ways, but also very different from the Athenians in some ways. And they're pretty cool too, just because they're such an extreme version of what a city-state is. And so we'll talk about both of them, Athens and Sparta. Yeah. So today, and I'll show you this very quickly here too. Here's where Athens is. It's in a place called Attica. It's more connected to mainland Greece. And then if you want to get to Sparta, you have to cross the isthmus, which we read about, that little bridge of land between these two areas. So you go through Megara and then through Corinth, and then you wind up, if you go south, you wind up in Laconia, where Sparta is. And so just so you know, that's where Athens is, that's where Sparta is. Right, so now we're in classical period Greece. We're roughly around 400 BCE, and so the Dark Ages in Greece ended around 700 BCE, and so after 300 years or so, we find ourselves in the classical period, where lots of interesting things happen for the Greek world and for Athens in particular. I'm just going to jump to this. So the first question I asked you today is this: what were tyrants? What's a tyrant? Woo, you're so quick. So Cindy says tyrants come to power in most city-states for a brief period, henceforth replacing them with a more popular form of government. Okay. Aliana says they are bad rulers who ruled the city-states for a brief period before they were driven out by people who banded together. That is the case in Athens, for sure. Rulers who came to power in most city-states for a short period of time before the people drove them out. Yep, good. Tyrants came to power. And okay, replacing them with a popular form of government. Good. Tyrants in early oral tradition suggest that city-states likely went through periods of turmoil or change in form of government before developing a more stable constitution. Good. Okay. Very, very good. So again, I don't know what your understanding of tyrant is. Pearlie's got something too. Citizens had at least some degree of political power, although some degree of strife materialized. Right, okay, I'm going to talk about this. So traditionally in Greek society, we had kind of the regular people, right? The regular citizens of a city-state. And then we had an aristocracy, okay? We had aristocrats. We had people who were belonged to noble families, had more money, had more status, and they were generally the people who were in charge. Now, at various points in history, sometimes the regular people, the common people, and the aristocrats couldn't seem to agree, and the common people didn't like how the aristocrats were running their city-state, and so sometimes you would get a tyrant. And so a tyrant would come in, and so we read about one in the textbook, a tyrant called Pisistratus. Pisistratus shows up in Athens one day. He's got this girl with him who he says is Athena. People, I don't know if they believe that or not, but he dressed her up like Athena, the god, and people thought she was Athena or whatever. And Pisistratus said, hey, if you put me into power, then I'll do all these things for you. And so people supported him, and he was able to take power. And so Pisistratus was a tyrant, a ruler who came to power, became a monarch, a single ruler, and ruled over Athens. Now, we have kind of a negative connotation of the word tyrant, but it only gets that negative connotation later. And so Pisistratus, for example, was actually a pretty good ruler. He made a lot of important political and economic changes in Athens, and the people generally liked him. And so even though the aristocrats who were kind of pushed aside by a tyrant like Pisistratus, even though the aristocrats didn't like it, the citizens themselves actually were happy with Pisistratus as a tyrant, as a ruler. But unfortunately, the guys who come after Pisistratus dies, his son Hippias comes to power, and it turns out that Hippias is kind of a jerk, and suddenly the people don't really like having a tyrant anymore. And so as you read about, the tyrant is overthrown, right? They get rid of Hippias with a little help from the Spartans. Is that right? I gotta check my history. I'm not sure on that one. Either way, the Athenians overthrow the tyrant and have to create a new system of government. So we hear a little bit about the reforms of Solon, right? So Solon comes a little bit before some of the major democratic reforms in Athens, but Cindy says he does create a more democratic constitution. Yeah, so he lays some of the framework for democracy in Athens. He wrote some poetry, which is interesting. Most politicians don't leave poetry, but that's okay. Aliana says, more democratic constitutions. Yeah, he divides the citizens into 5 classes based on income. Democratic constitution, good. And the poetry thing. Aliana also says he assigns a level of political participation and responsibility, commensurate with each class. Yeah, so people are divided into different classes, and they are given a certain amount of political participation depending on their economic class. KC says he also provides debt forgiveness. So they say in the text that there's a lot of debt slavery at the time. And so Solon makes some changes to get people out of debt slavery, makes them free citizens again so they can sort of go about their lives, right? Casey also says, divide into 5 classes based on income with political responsibility. That's good. Kate, that's good too. Also good. And Karen says he decides people into social classes based on economic status. Good. 2 courts. Yeah. So yeah, that's all good. So Solon sort of forgives a bunch of debt slavery. Sorry, my nose is itchy here. Forgives a bunch of debt slavery, and he lays sort of the foundation for a democratic system to appear in Athens, which of course it will later do. So I was talking about Pisistratus here a few minutes ago. He is a tyrant who illegally seized control of Athens and stays in power. Again, we should remember, though, that actually most of the people were okay with this. The people supported Pisistratus. That's how he got in power in the first place. And he generally did some good things. Athens was better off under him. Right, so that's good. Sorry, my nose is still itchy here. Okay, that's good. That's good. Yeah. And had support of the Athenian population. That's important to remember. Good. That is good. That's good too. Yeah. So what happens here is that, again, Solon makes these reforms to lay the foundation for democracy, but then Pisistratus shows up, gets control of Athens, and rules it as a tyrant. He kind of rules it as a single ruler, which, again, for Athens is not a bad thing. He does a lot of good things, and Athens kind of thrives because of it. But his son, Hippias, like I said, is not the best guy. He's kind of a jerk. He's very paranoid and punishes people very easily. And so the Athenians are happy with Pisistratus, but they are far less happy with his son Hippias. And so Hippias gets overthrown. And then the question is what to do. Okay? And this is where Cleisthenes comes in. So Cleisthenes is a noble person. So he's part of the aristocracy in Athens. But when they bring him in, when they ask him to create a political system for Athens, Cleisthenes is kind of stuck, right? Because there's basically been two political systems in Athens so far. So we have the aristocracy, the aristocrats that rule Athens, but the problem with them is that they're always fighting each other for power, right? They're always arguing with themselves. They're always trying to put themselves above other aristocrats, and it just creates turmoil and problems, right? On the other hand, they've had a single ruler. They've had tyrants, but the problem with a single ruler is that you never know how good they're going to be. If you get a good one like Pisistratus, great, right? If you get a bad one like Hippias, then things are awful and there's nothing you can do, right? So Cleisthenes is looking at both of these options and he thinks, neither of these are any good anymore. They don't work. And so Cleisthenes does something pretty revolutionary for the time. He gives power not to a tyrant, not to the aristocrats. He gives power to the people, right? So Cleisthenes decides that the people are actually capable of leading Athens, of governing Athens themselves. So he creates a constitution that creates full direct democracy in Athens. Okay, and so like Aliana mentions here, like you mentioned, that basic system is going to remain in place in Athens from when it's instituted, which is around 500 BC, for about 200 years until Athens is conquered by the Macedonians, Philip and Alexander. But that comes later. So yeah, he creates, Cleisthenes, an aristocrat, creates this system of direct democracy where the individual citizens of Athens are responsible for governing themselves. They're responsible for ruling themselves. Yeah, so Cleisthenes sets up participation for all citizens in an ecclesia, so a large assembly, a large voting assembly, and then he creates law courts as well, right? Right after, yeah, so they kick Hippias out, right? They overthrow Hippias. Cleisthenes is part of that, and then Cleisthenes creates changes that gives power to the Athenian people, right? Which again is revolutionary. Nobody's really done this before to this extent, right? At this point in history, people have always been ruled by a king or an emperor or or a tyrant or some sort of single ruler, or they've been ruled by an aristocracy, a group of wealthy, noble people. And so the early Zhou period was kind of like that in China. Greek city-states were kind of like that. But then Cleisthenes looks at those two earlier forms of government. He says, neither of these work very well. They both have problems. So he comes up with a new solution and he gives the power to the people, and the people vote on everything. Oh, good. Okay. So, to dig a little deeper into this, I have a video for you to watch. It's pretty interesting, and we get to actually go to Greece, which is always fun. Part of the one of the fun things about a class like this is that you can sort of travel the world within your classroom, and so we will get to go to Greece through this documentary. But let's take a quick break, stretch your legs, get a drink, whatever you need to do. Come back here, and then we'll talk about the documentary that we're going to watch. Okay, so I'll see you in just 10 minutes. Okay, people, and we're back. So I know that was kind of a lot to throw at you. There were some, there were some unfamiliar names and unfamiliar terms mixed in there, and the creation of democracy in Athens. There's a little more to that story in terms of Pisistratus and Hippias and Cleisthenes, and there's a little more going on there than we've read about, but I think we can probably leave those parts of the story out. And the important thing that we probably need to know is that traditionally Athens was ruled by aristocrats, right? A group of wealthy people from prominent families. There was a tyrant who managed to take over, Pisistratus, who was good, and the people liked having him in charge. His son Hippias was not good, and so people overthrew Hippias. And then it fell to an aristocrat, it fell to Cleisthenes to try to devise a government system that would work for Athens. And so, again, he looked at these two options: rule by the aristocrats and rule by a single ruler, a tyrant or a king, and felt that neither of those were a really good option. They didn't really work for Athens in the past. He needed a new choice, a third option. And so, again, he comes up with this pretty revolutionary idea of democracy where people rule themselves. And so the elements of Athenian democracy are pretty interesting, and we can probably dig into those, I think, a little more tomorrow. But I think I would like to set you loose on a documentary here that I would like you to watch. And again, it will dig into a little bit about how democracy is created in Athens, but also how it kind of functions and how it works. And so we'll hear a little bit about what Athenian democracy is like. We'll see in the documentary, we'll see some of the places where the Athenians were actually doing this democracy, where they were speaking to the sort of larger assembly of Athenians, where people were voting and how people were voting. So we'll hear a lot about how Athens gets their democracy, how they do their democracy, and then what the actual outcome of it is. Okay, so in Microsoft Teams, I've posted the video link and a bunch of questions. I know there's a lot of questions, but some of them are pretty easy. And I have about 28 minutes of we have about 28 minutes of documentary to watch today. So I think maybe without further ado, I will set you loose on that. 28, so that'll be 40. So let's meet back here. Let's meet back here at 11:45. Okay, so I'll give you some time to watch the video, answer the questions as best you can. Come back here at 11:45. We'll just have a very quick tie-up, and then most of these questions we'll have to deal with tomorrow, but we can give it a shot. Okay, so I'll see you back here in how long is that? 34 minutes. I'll see you back here in 34 minutes. And we'll talk about some of the questions from that documentary. Again, the link and the questions have just been posted in Microsoft Teams. So go there, start watching, answer your questions. I'll see you at 11:45. Okay? Okay, people, so we're back. I hope that was interesting for you, or at least that first part was interesting. We saw we saw a little bit of history in terms of how Athens kind of came to get a democracy in the first place. So we heard the story about Pisistratus and Hippias and Cleisthenes. We kind of jumped ahead a little bit in history. So the Persian invasion that we're talking about here is actually the second one. The Athenians had managed to defeat the Persians at Marathon some years earlier. But here we're looking at potentially another Persian invasion. So that's kind of where we are in history. We saw some technology. We saw lots of clay pots. We saw a few interesting physical structures and inventions that helped people do their democratic things, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. We heard a little bit about culture in terms of what the Athenians were like, and particularly maybe some of their views on women, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. And then we were introduced to these triremes, right? These ships that the Athenians built that they're basically all rowers with a metal battering ram on the front to sort of puncture other ships. And so the Athenians will build pretty significant numbers of these ships in order to defend themselves against the Persians, who are definitely coming. So, I don't know that we have time to dig too deeply into this, so hold on to your answers from that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll remind you that we'll do a quiz on Monday, which I will post in Microsoft Teams. I'll post the class numbers, but I think it'll be just on China. We won't do micropaper number 3, which we mentioned. Micropaper number 2 is still due on the 21st. And on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, I will assign you the final research paper so that you can start working on that, because there'll be more work to do for that, because it of course takes the place of a final exam for this class. So I think I'll probably leave it there because we've only got a couple minutes left. So if you have any questions, of course, in the meantime, you can always send me a message, but otherwise that's it. I'm going to end class. I'll see you all first thing tomorrow, 10 o'clock tomorrow. If you can go outside and get some fresh air, try and do it. It looks like a beautiful day here in Vancouver anyway. But until then, yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. So bye.